Hello, and welcome to my top 10 reads of 2025 with no repeat series, no rereads, and I'm going to avoid the temptation to talk about a long list of honorable mentions, all the books that I might regret not putting on this list. I might talk about them in a separate video, but don't take the ranking of this list too seriously because I've already changed the order a few times and I don't have complete confidence I wouldn't change the order in some ways a week from now. But let's get into the list. So coming in at number 10 is The Sword of the Lictor by Gene Wolfe. This is book 3 in Book of the New Sun, and it is by far my favorite Book of the New Sun book so far. In this installment, we follow Severian from a walled fortress city through jungle and mountaintop to a lakeside, encountering many a strange creature along the way. But in addition to this being a physically taxing, arduous journey, it is also an emotional journey. It is one that involves loss, depression, death, and transformation. And so for me, Severian as a character became much more emotionally complex in this installment. He finds himself in an unexpected heroic role at times, and I appreciated the conversations about obedience and rebellion. There are so many mysteries surrounding time and memory in the series and certain objects. So I found it fun to try and understand the deep cryptic layers that Wolf was presenting in this installment, and I had fun doing that with my friend Jake from Nerd Level Rising, who I buddy read this with. A reason this is not higher on my list is because of the way women are handled in this series and the way that every woman in this series seems to be assessed based on her sexual desirability and how that's also attached to her age. It's done in a way that I didn't feel comfortable with. And I'm trying to suspend judgment because I haven't finished book 4 yet, so I don't know entirely where we're going. And there do seem to be other ways of looking at the narrative when it comes to women, but it's something that has not been striking a chord for me, at least that part of the story. But otherwise, The Sword of the Lictor was a fascinating read from beginning to end. I loved some of the descriptions so much that I was sending screenshots of Wolf's prose to friends because I truly find his writing beautiful at times and quite unique. The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco is a murder mystery / historical fiction story, but it is also an ambitious piece with so much to say about the Middle Ages and about the dissemination of knowledge, whether that should be for the elite or for the many. And it is a compelling story following 2 monks who show up at an abbey, and they're are monks there dropping dead. So they're trying to figure out what's going on there. But the reason this book made such an impression on me is that it brought me in touch with my love of the medieval time period. And reading this book brought to light just how unique this time period was in terms of the symbolism, the mysticism, the intricacies in the architecture and art, and all of that is on vivid display page by page in this novel. And in addition to that, it's entertaining, it's funny at times, it has great irony, great character work, and there is an allusion to a famous author in literature, and I didn't catch it until I read the afterword by Umberto Eco. But yes, this brought me so much in touch with what I love about this period and the philosophical debates at the time, the theological arguments, and how philosophy largely influenced Christianity at that time, especially the teachings of Aristotle. So I love the way that that was all woven into the story to the point where I thought about calling up my friend Philip Chase and asking him if he could train me to be a medievalist. I know that that's not likely, but truly Umberto Eco knew this time period. He did such an incredible job with the construction of this novel. I had a fabulous time reading this with the Fireside Discord, and I highly recommend it if you enjoy labyrinthine libraries and this time period, the theological and philosophical debates of that time and the way that religion conflicted with politics. So many historical details, but also done in such an entertaining way. And so truly, I think this is an ambitious piece and also a thoroughly entertaining, engrossing one. A Brightness Long Ago by Guy Gavriel Kay is Kay doing what Kay does beautifully. This is a story that is about looking back on your life and noticing the forks in the road. There's even a quote about forks in the road. Those moments in life when you make a decision that changes everything in your life moving forward, and about the people you meet along the way and how you change their lives forever and how they change yours forever. It's also a story about looking back at life and realizing that even though when you were young, you might have felt like you had all the choices before you, but when you're older in life, you realize life could have only gone one way. And everyone had a role to play, even if they were on opposing sides. And there's something bittersweet and tragic and melancholic about that. That is basically what you are getting in A Brightness Long Ago, but with so many excellent characters. It is historical, it is hardly fantasy at all, but it has wonderful adventure and romance and tragedy. And again, it's just a beautiful melancholic story that is Kay doing what Kay does best, which is this theme of reflective melancholy. And it's beautiful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, speaking of Guy Gavriel Kay, I often say that fans of Guy Gavriel Kay should read this next book, which is The Curse of Chalian by Lois McMaster Bujold. And I don't know exactly why this made me think of Kay so much, except that I felt like there was something about this book that gave me a similar sense of melancholic, reflective tone. But we are following an older character, a veteran character named Kazarel, and he is making his way to the castle where he was once a page. He's gone through so much before the book begins, and you're slowly drip fed all of the things that occurred to him preceding that time in a way that's never given in an info dump. It just seamlessly gets you into the narrative. But he comes back to Chalian, this castle, and he ends up being appointed the secretary tutor to the heiress of Chalian. So we're following the mentor character in this case. Unlike most fantasy, I think we're usually following somebody who has a mentor. We're following the mentor character. And this book, it perfectly weaves together politics, magic, religion. It also has multiple vivid castle settings, a sprinkle of humor. But in addition to all those wonderful things, something else that I appreciated about this novel is the way it lightly examined PTSD and trauma, and how it might be tempting to compare the horrible things that one person went through with the horrible things another person went through, when in the end, you really can't compare trauma. It just needs to be acknowledged and validated, even though the experiences might be totally different. We don't know the true depths of it. So I feel like that is beautifully acknowledged in the story in a subtle way. But this was a fantastic read. I think it's a fantastic introductory point to Bujold's writing, and especially the world of the five gods. This next book might make me lose my Dude Bro status card because I'm putting a love story on my list for the first time in a top 10 on my channel, and that is The Silver Medal Lover by Tanith Lee. This is a book that takes place in a future setting when an asteroid gets very close to hitting Earth, causes a cataclysm, and we're following an elite, privileged young teenage girl named Jane who lives with her very controlling mother. There is Greek mythology alluded to in the story, but her life forever changes when she meets a robot, a male robot who is a minstrel, and she believes she is infatuated with him. And so this robots in this story, they're owned by a corporation, rented out to rich people for pleasure, whether that be sexual pleasure or entertainment. And there is conversation in this book about the threat of these robots taking over jobs, taking over the arts, replacing romantic partners. And I just found the conversation in here really interesting in light of conversations happening right now, even though I would not consider this a cautionary tale, but it was a thoroughly enchanting tale for me. I loved the setting descriptions. I loved the characters, the chemistry, the transformation they undergo, the questions that it brings up. And I will willingly give up my Dude Bro status card for this book because I stand by it. I love this book. Fever Dream by George R. R. Martin is my favorite vampire book so far. Granted, I haven't read a lot of vampire stories, but this one is more than just a horror story. It's what I would describe as a swashbuckling nautical adventure. And if you enjoy Scott Lynch's writing in The Gentleman Bastards, I think there's a good chance you could enjoy this book because in addition to the excellent setting descriptions, you also have this incredible dynamic between two characters, Abner Marsh and Joshua York. And for me, that was the biggest highlight of the story. I adored these characters, and I felt like the historical setting was perfect for this vampire tale. It takes place in the Civil War era in the Deep South in the US during the time of steamboats, which are largely explored in the story. And this book has gorgeous prose. There were so many beautiful quotable lines. There are excellent moments of humor. I also appreciated the way that poetry was integrated into this, specifically She Walks in Beauty by Lord Byron and Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. And the themes of this story also fit this changing historical landscape that occurs throughout the novel, which is the romanticization of dreams and the failure to bring those dreams to fruition when the changing historical landscape makes those things just out of reach. And so I feel like that's captured so well in the story. There's so much I love about it. And I think that of all the books I read this year, this might have been the most fun I had reading a book. I couldn't put it down. I read this thanks to Kyle from Read by Kyle because he had a whole project last year with reading books by George R. R. Martin that are not A Song of Ice and Fire, and had a fabulous discussion on his channel with him, with Alan from the Library of Alexandria, and Jimmy from Chatting with Nuts. So I highly encourage you to watch that discussion if you read this book. A Pale View of Hills by Ishiguro is one of the most impactful reads of 2025 for me. This was his debut novel, which absolutely floors me. We are following a middle-aged woman who is confronted by the news of the suicide of her eldest daughter, and meanwhile her other daughter has come to visit her, and this leads her to reflect on her past, to reflect on her time in Nagasaki in the wake of the atomic bombing. And so this story largely explores the choices we make and how it might impact children, how it might impact those that we care for or feel responsible towards. It is about what it means to be a woman at that time in Japan, and also about progress versus tradition. And it was really beautifully captured throughout the story, those themes. But then when you get to the end of the story, I feel like there's this other thing that you start to realize that Ishiguro is doing that transforms the whole entire novel. So this book truly blew me away, and there's no way I could not include it on this list. At the beginning of the video, I talked about no repeat series on this list, but I am going to have a repeat author for the first time on my top 10, and that author is Ishiguro, and this time it is for The Remains of the Day. I had to include both A Pale View of Hills and The Remains of the Day because both books impacted me for life. But The Remains of the Day is about an English butler who is living during a time when it is no longer a thing to be an English butler. They seem to be a thing of the past. And so he is reflecting on his life as he's going on a road trip. So it's a dual timeline. He's reflecting on his past when he was early in his career and he was aspiring to be a great English butler. And he defines exactly what that means to him and the sacrifices he's willing to make, the choices he's willing to make in order to establish that elusive goal of greatness. And so it is so much about what it means to be great. It also goes into the boundary between being personal and being professional. And he makes some jaw-dropping decisions throughout the story, but in addition to it being a highly reflective book, it was also an emotional one for me, surprisingly so. I actually was surprised with how emotional I felt. The prose is much more formal than A Pale View of Hills, but it perfectly matches the tone and manner of this English butler character, and there is a deep amount of subtext to dig into with this unreliable narration. I read a little bit of a paper about Ishiguro and how a theme that he gravitates towards is that of obsolescence, when things become obsolete. And in some of his books, I think it's a bit of a spoiler to go into that theme, but in this book, it certainly is relevant, and you could say so in a non-spoiler way. And I think it's handled to perfection. So this is certainly a standout read for me. Again, surprised how emotional it made me. And I, again, couldn't help but have Ishiguro on a second time on this list. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman is a book that is more than just about being a female, as the title might suggest. It is about what it means to be human. And as much as I joked about losing my Dude Bro status card earlier, I do know a lot of my male friends in this corner of BookTube have read and loved this book. So I know I'm in good company in feeling that this resonates. This resonates widely. And so this is a post-apocalyptic story that follows a young girl who's trapped in a bunker with 39 other women. And unlike the other women, this girl, being the youngest, remembers nothing before the bunker. She only has known this life, whereas the other women, they know they have been robbed of something meaningful. They remember their children, their husbands, their lives beforehand, the richness of colors and of society. And so because they feel robbed of meaning in that way, and the girl has known nothing else, she feels somewhat empowered by this idea that she has not known the loss that they have experienced, and in that way can create some of her own ways of living or of exploring meaning for herself. And so in that way, I feel the book is existential from this girl's point of view and maybe more nihilistic, considering what the women have lost against their own will. So the story digs into prisons, both literal and figurative. It explores time in an interesting way. It's a story that explores the need for connection and community. It's about hope and hopelessness. It's about whether knowledge should be celebrated for the sake of knowledge, or whether knowledge should only be learned if it can be applied to experience. There is so much interesting conversation in this book, and I knew as soon as I read it at the beginning of the year that it would be a favorite for me this year, but I did reread it later on in the year. So I did reread this book, but because I read it for the first time in 2025, I'm counting it. And the second time I read it, it actually put me in a little bit of an existential crisis. But there are different ways and layers to the story. And I had a fabulous deep dive discussion with Ben from Overly Average Ben on his channel. So I highly encourage you to check out that discussion if you've read the book. But this is a book that I widely recommend. It is bleak, but the language is easy to read. I think it's accessible, but it still digs into some very deep and meaningful themes. Now for my favorite book of the year, Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. This is book one in the Tawny Man trilogy. It's also book one in the third subseries in the larger realm of the Elderlings. I was already in awe of the way that Robin Hobb wrote first-person narration in the Farseer trilogy, but this book exceeded that for me because of everything that this character had been through up to this point in the book, the time that has gone by and how that has made everything all the more poignant, but also the way that this character has this deep well of emotional complexity to him, and yet he keeps those emotions somewhat at arm's length. He's a bit resistant to allowing himself to go into it, but you get the sense of it through the subtext in his interactions with other characters. And I just think it's done so well in this book. And it also melds with the themes explored, including trauma, trust, and boundaries, which is also linked to the magic and how that works in the story. When I read Ship of Magic earlier in the year, I thought that was going to be my favorite fantasy book of the year by far. And this book, it exceeded that. And I think it's because of how much it moved me emotionally, how much I felt it on a visceral level, and how much it continued to stir in me long after I finished the book. So there you have it. Now, I tried to keep my thoughts concise in this video, but if you want more in-depth thoughts, I'm going to link all of my reviews in the description below, as well as any relevant discussions I've had about any of these books. And please share with me in the comment section below your thoughts. If you've read any of these books, if you're planning to read any of these books, share your favorite book or your top 10 in the comment section if you feel so inclined. And thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.